Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Friends of Flight 93 virtual speaker series. My name is Brooke Neel. I'm the Director of Programs with the Friends of Flight 93. So the Friends of Flight 93 is the nonprofit partner that supports the National Park Service at Flight 93 National Memorial. The Friends provide resources and volunteer support, as well as raise funds to ensure the memorial maintains its relevancy for generations to come. We focus on educating the public and the next generation on the story of Flight 93, supporting environmental programs like Plant a Tree at Flight 93 and the Pollinator Project, as well as support the National Park Service programs like the September 11 observance. One of the many educational programs we support is the Speaker Series. The digital lecture series showcases speakers with direct ties to Flight 93 and the response to the September 11, 2001 terror attacks to share how these events changed lives and the country. You do have the opportunity to submit questions for our guests through the questions pane of the control panel. You can send these at any time during our presentation. So let me welcome our guest speakers, Flight 93 family members, Ed Root and Emily Schenkel. The father-daughter duo will be discussing their cousin, United Airlines flight attendant, Lorraine Bay. Ed Root is an historian and author. His cousin, Lorraine Grace Bay, was a senior flight attendant on United Airlines Flight 93 on September 11, 2001. He served on the Stage 2 jury, which selected the winning design of Flight 93 National Memorial in 2005, and has been a member of the Families of Flight 93 board since 2006. Emily Root Schenkel is an account manager and serves on numerous boards. Emily's godmother was Lorraine Grace Bay, and her daughter is named Lorraine in her memory. Additionally, Emily serves on the Friends of Flight 93 and Families of Flight 93 board today. So a little bit about Lorraine Bay. Lorraine was one of 5 flight attendants aboard Flight 93. She was one of the most senior flight attendants with United Airlines with 37 years experience. Lorraine was a loving wife, family member, and friend. And so Ed and Emily, do you want to share a little bit about Lorraine?
Go ahead.
You can start, Pop.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Lorraine was an only child. She was born on January the 20th, 1943. Her mom and my dad were siblings, so we were first cousins. She was 3.5 years older than I was, so she was the big sister that I never had. She was the kind of person who had that personality. Very beginning of her life, she was always gregarious. She was always fun-loving. She always had a smile on her face. She had a touch of class, as I like to say, from a very early age also. The photo that's up on the screen now was taken down in North Wildwood, New Jersey in 1956. So Lorraine was around 13 years old. And you can see that she's on the left side of the screen, and it's the shore. Everybody's pretty casual. I'm the dorky little kid at the top of the screen. Lorraine is there. She has a necklace on. So while most people in the shore in those days were very casual, she always had that little bit of extra kind of class with her. She was always interested in sports. She was, I wouldn't say knowledgeable about sports, but she enjoyed sports. She was the captain of the color guard. She joined a community senior drum and bugle corps. So she was always involved with the community and her school. She was, I guess, what I would call the quintessential teenager of the late 1950s and early 60s.
Sure. So she was my aunt, Lorraine. That's what I always referred to her. As my dad said, both, she and my father were only children. So she was always my Aunt Lorraine. She was my godmother, and she was the dream aunt that you would want. She had this glamorous job of a flight attendant, and she would tell me stories of all these different places she would go, and she would always bring me little things back. She would bring autographs back from my brother and I, depending on who she would get to autograph. Sometimes she wasn't sure exactly who they were, but she knew that they maybe played a sport, and so she would get their autograph and bring it back to us. And she was a very kind woman. She truly cared very much for everyone. And, you know, she would sit and talk with me and listen to me, even as a child. Even if I was perhaps having a moment, you know, I can remember one time at Thanksgiving specifically, I was having a meltdown because I wanted to watch something on TV and we only had one TV at the time. So, and she sat down and just listened to me and calmed me down. And before I knew it, my worries were gone. When I was older, I traveled a lot. So my first job out of college, I traveled over 100,000 miles a year for business. And that was always interesting because we would talk about the differences between being a business traveler, a frequent business traveler, and flight attendant. And it really helped me to understand what they go through. And I always very much appreciated that she really truly cared about my viewpoint as well, even though she had at that point already been doing this for 30 some years. She still wanted to know what my take on things were. And, you know, we would have long phone conversations where we would talk about friends and family. And she was just such a caring person that it was wonderful to talk to. And she was a lot of fun. The gifts she gave were always just so well thought out. She took me shopping after I graduated from high school, and I still have some of the things that she bought me. And if I were still the same size that I was, then I'd still be able to wear them. She had a timelessness about her and her style. So these are, you know, some of the family pictures. Obviously, the little one in black and white was her as a child. And then that is her holding me on my christening. And then the bottom picture was in Upper Black Eddy in Pennsylvania on the Delaware River. And it was a family picnic. And she's sitting next to her husband, my Uncle Eric, and across from my mom. My dad and I are actually in the chair in the back there. But you can see she's kind of looking up at the camera. She always has this little tilt to her head. I think you might have already noticed in the few pictures, but just this little tilt of enjoyment of life, I would say. So it's a little background.
The photograph on the screen now is Lorraine getting her stewardess insignia from her father once she finished training. After she graduated from high school, she had a job for a while at a large car dealership in the office, which she enjoyed, but somewhere along the line, the lure of the skies called her, and she approached United Airlines and had to go to Chicago for training. And it was a different world in many respects than flying in the 1960s than it is today. Flying in general was more formal. People dressed more formally when they traveled than they do today. To be a stewardess, as they were called then, there were some very strict requirements. They had to be of a certain age. They wanted attractive young women. The women needed in the beginning to be single. They couldn't be married. They actually had classes for these young women in deportment and makeup and things like that. They even had weight requirements where you had to weigh in, that you couldn't weigh too much. So it was more, I guess, considered glamorous flying back in the day. It was something that not everyone did, and she enjoyed it from the beginning. She enjoyed people. She enjoyed her coworkers. And one of our favorite family stories in legend is as a rookie, as a very inexperienced stewardess, she was on a short flight, and it was her job to hand out sandwiches to everyone. So as she was handing out the sandwiches and going along short flight, and lo and behold, the plane is getting ready to land and she's still handing out sandwiches. And the reason she was still handing out the sandwiches is that she thought it would be the nice thing to do if she unwrapped them first for everyone. So obviously it took a lot longer than it would have been if she would have just passed them out as she was supposed to do. So she always could laugh at herself, and we always kind of had that little story that every once in a while would pop up at family gatherings. Thanksgiving was our favorite holiday at her parents' house. It was a day of watching football and eating too much and having a good time. And there was all kinds of kids that would come into the house over the Thanksgiving. Lorraine loved to shop, as Emily mentioned, and some of the stories about shopping on her trips, a lot of her trips were cross-country trips. And I remember one time she was talking about her feet hurt so much, but she had to go shopping with another flight attendant, and she's walking through the streets of San Francisco barefoot so she could do both things because her feet hurt, but she still wanted to do what she wanted to do.
And one thing I just wanted to mention briefly, you'll notice on the slide that it mentioned that 2 of her colleagues received cards. She was kind of known as the card maven, the card woman. She would send cards to say, Happy Tuesday, you know, I love you, here's a card. Birthdays, illnesses, anniversaries, whatever the case is. So my brother's birthday is actually September 10th, so he got a card the day before, and then there were 2 people that got cards afterwards. And when we were kind of going through her things, we found her box of cards that she had for months prepared in this neatly organized box, you know, by month, by recipient, and what it was. So my birthday is in October, and there was a card in there ready for me. I actually found 2 Christmas presents for myself that she had, or 1 birthday and 1 Christmas present, I think it was, that she had already bought and wrapped, and she kept notes of everything she bought for people so that she would make sure that, you know, she was getting similar things from my brother and myself. And pretty small family. My father's an only child, Lorraine was an only child, so it was much more noticeable if people got more or less than somebody else, and she was always very careful about that. And just another kind of example of how caring she was and how considerate and thoughtful. It wasn't last minute, oh, that's right, I have to get a gift for that person. It was months in advance that she had all of this planned and thought out. So.
And especially when somebody dies tragically, I think it's normal to talk about all the positive things of that person. But quite honestly, especially when I think about all the Thanksgivings and all the things that we went to, I just never recall anything but a smiling face and a pleasant personality. I'm sure there were times when she probably drove her parents crazy, but as most teenagers do, but I never saw that, or if I did, I guess refused to remember. So it's just one of those personality things that was with her from a very, very young age. And as Em said, she enjoyed, especially working in coach. She enjoyed mentoring the younger flight attendants and talking to people. And she told many stories about her trips, but she always seemed to talk about the fun things or the funny things. Every once in a while, she might mention about, oh, I had a cranky guy on this flight or something, but it still ended up with a kind of a laugh and a smile. I'm sure she had really rotten days where things didn't go well at all, but those stories, she never seemed to care about passing those along.
Mm-hmm. So this is a picture from my 25th birthday, which was October of 2010. So she was there, obviously, and I'm wearing a vest that she got me that I still wear now. It's beautiful. And, you know, it was one of those, I remember saying to her, like, oh, I wasn't sure if you were going to make it. And she's, of course I'm going to make it. It's your 25th birthday. I wouldn't miss it. And she was just funny. I didn't meet my husband until a few years after 2001, but I had been dating a guy for a while, and we were at some family function, and she was coming late, and my boyfriend at the time had to leave early, and I'll never forget it because he said goodbye, and I didn't even realize she was there. And I look up to see her like sprinting across this parking lot, all dressed up in heels, chasing after him because she was, you know, she just wanted to meet him. It was important to her to meet him. And that's just the kind of, again, she was interested, she cared, she wanted to know and be there. And she was really, it wasn't on the surface, everything was very sincere and true with her.
Yeah. Let's talk about 2001 specifically. So for those of us who are alive, you know, we viscerally remember where we were, exactly what we were doing. Can you tell us a bit about where you were and how you found out about the attacks and Lorraine being on Flight 93?
Sure. So at the time, again, I was traveling a lot. So I was actually home in the morning because I was going to be flying out from Pennsylvania to Indianapolis that day. And one of my coworkers who also traveled a lot called me, and she was, you know, super upset. Turn on the TV. So I turned on the TV, and my first thought was my brother. So he worked in Midtown Manhattan, and, you know, obviously didn't really know what was going on yet, but just thinking about him. And at that point, after 37 years, my Aunt Lorraine was not traveling as much. She still flew, but not quite as frequently. And so it wasn't really on the top of my head. I did talk to my brother and, you know, was able to find out that he was okay. I was able to talk to him a few times. He had one of those just arduous journeys to get back to New Jersey. But so during all of that, you know, I was calling my grandparents and letting them know that I had talked to Derek. My parents were actually coming home from Europe, so I wasn't able to talk to them. But I was talking to him, and then my Aunt Betty, who is another cousin, who is another only child, so I always called her Aunt Betty, called me, and she was, you know, really hysterical. And I kept saying, no, you know, Derek's okay. It's all right. He's okay. And then I finally understood what she was trying to tell me, and you know, was truly blindsided again because I had been so focused on him and making sure he was okay. And it was just, I can't really put into words what it was exactly like to get that information. You know, then my poor brother finally got home, and he called me to say he had gotten home and he was safe. And then I had to tell him. And, you know, it was devastating. And I talked to my Uncle Eric at some point very briefly. I don't even remember if it was actually that day or the next day, but I did talk to him. And I had to talk to, you know, my grandparents, my dad's parents, and then my mom's mom. So it was, I had friends then come and stay with me because I was, you know, pretty wrecked at that point. I think, honestly, just being sort of command central at that point for my family and all the communication was probably the only thing that sort of kept me kind of together. And then my dad called me, and I'll let him tell his story. I didn't tell them right away until a couple of hours later, and then, you know, had to tell them, and you can tell your part of that if you want then, perhaps.
Picture up there now is Lorraine's high school graduating class. So she's obviously smiling with her head tilted a little bit. On September 11th of that year, my wife and I were in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We had been in London for vacation, and originally we were scheduled to come home on September the 8th. But my wife is involved as a nursing executive, and we actually stayed a few extra days. At that time, there were actually nursing shortages in the United States, and she was interviewing possible people to come over to the States for a job here as a nurse. So that's why we were coming home on September 11th. And we were one of those planes that we had taken off from Gatwick toward Philadelphia. And I'm guessing we were not quite halfway because we were returned to England rather than going to Newfoundland, where a lot of the planes landed. And I remember it so well because I should have known something was up. Usually right before you land back in the States, they would give you a US Customs card. And we were getting ready to land. We hadn't received anything. And I caught the attention of one of the flight attendants, and I asked, and she was thinking very quickly, and she said, oh, they gave us ones that were printed in German, so we can't give them out. I think it was pretty obvious later on that the flight crew at that point knew what had happened, but they really didn't want to make any announcements, probably to not scare everyone to death. So right as we're approaching land, I looked out the window, and I hadn't flown a lot back in those days, but enough that it didn't look right to me. And I remember saying to my wife that the land is on the wrong side of the plane as we were coming in. It just didn't look right. And right after that, as we were landing, they gave us a sheet of information that talked about the attacks in New York. That paper did not say anything about Flight 93 or Shanksville or Somerset. There was a short period of time when that's all we knew, and I actually thought it might have been a nuclear attack. And of course, our thoughts went to our son who worked in Manhattan. So it was a very trying time. Because of Emily's business travel, we actually flew business class. So the folks on the plane kept everybody in business class together. They shepherded us downstairs in the airport, and they kept us together. They called a bus for us. They had a hotel for us. And while we were waiting in the airport, some other passenger had a calling card, and he let me use it, and I called Emily. And as she said, she let us know that our son was okay. She didn't tell us about Lorraine at that point. She didn't want to tell us while I'm standing in the middle of an airport somewhere. So we get on this bus, we get to the hotel, we got settled, and then I was able to call back. And I remember it like it was 10 minutes ago. I was sitting at this little desk with a phone. My wife was sitting in a chair, and she told me, and we just, the next 3 days are kind of like a blur. We never were able to come home until that Friday, and we actually ended up getting the first flight out of Gatwick back to the States, and Emily had a lot to do with helping us to get on that flight. And of course, as confusing as things were here that day, overseas it was even worse, because on British media, they were taking it as far as the Twin Towers had a capacity of, I forget, 90,000 people. So they're talking about, fatalities that were far, far above than the actual fatality level, which of course was horrible to begin with. But sitting there in London, 3,000 miles away, we were hearing figures that were, 10, 20 times that. So it was, and everyone was very gracious there. All the people that we met in the hotel, we managed to walk around a little bit, but we were pretty much in a fog until that Friday morning when we got up at, the night before we were supposed to leave. We were supposed to be at the airport at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I think it was 2 o'clock or 2:30 in the morning, there was a fire drill. The fire alarm went off. So we had to get up, and we had our clothes and a sport coat. And I remember we were downstairs, and there was a bunch of young people at a party of some kind, and people were all dressed up and the gowns on and things. And I remember this poor young lady was standing there freezing in the middle of the night, and I ended up giving her my jacket for a while. So it was the things you remember, I guess, are just kind of bizarre, what stays in your mind. So we were able to get to the airport, and we were going to get on that plane kind of hell or high water. And the thing that was really interesting at the airport, it was the same flight crew that we had on Tuesday. So my wife was speaking with one of the flight attendants and told them what happened and our connection with Lorraine. And those folks were really, really gracious. And we couldn't fly business class because that plane was packed, and we ended up in coach, and we didn't care at that point. We just would have sat on the wing if we had to. But those folks were really nice to us. When we got to Pittsburgh, just about all the flights were canceled from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. We had been up. I wasn't even sure that if we rented a car, I was even capable of driving from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia at that point. But these folks actually got us on the last or only plane from Pittsburgh back to Philadelphia, where we met Emily and our good friend Barb at the airport. And so that's how we finally got home on that Friday. And that Friday was actually the day where the first memorial service was held in Somerset at the courthouse. And many family members were there already at that early time, but obviously we knew nothing about that. And I didn't get out to the crash site for another couple months until the first time I got out there.
So, speaking about the first kind of gathering of the families, and I guess I'd like be curious to hear, your experiences at the memorial from 2001 to now. You have, the signing of the Flight 93 National Memorial Act in 2002. You're meeting all these other family members, and then you have the whole process of the temporary memorials to creating the permanent memorial. And I know you served on the Stage 2 jury, which selected the winning design of Flight 93. Do you want to talk a bit about those?
Sure. I remember very well the first anniversary. Family members were brought out. There were quite a few of us at that time, and we were all put up in a resort. And that was the first real opportunity that I had to meet other family members and start to learn a little bit of the stories of other people. And it was the beginning of something that has still goes on to this day, which at times, frankly, is very awkward for family members. We, at this resort, they took really good care of us. We had buses to go from the resort to what would become the memorial for that first time. And as we drove there, they stopped traffic for us. They had state police at intersections, and people would stop and salute. There were flags out all over the place. And it was kind of a respect that was given to us for something for which we did not deserve. But it took a while to kind of learn that this respect was for the 40 heroes of Flight 93, and we were kind of their placeholders, as it were. So that was the beginning. That was in 2002, and of course we would go every year for the memorial, and kind of stayed in touch with things. It was around early in 2005 when I first became more closely involved. You mentioned about the memorial design. A competition went out, international competition, and there were over 1,000 designs that were submitted for the memorial. There were two juries. That first jury had an enviable job of culling down those 1,000+ submissions to 5 finalists. And I was selected to be on the second jury. And you had to volunteer for it. And I'm not sure exactly what the criterion was, what people they picked as far as family members, but it consisted of family members. It consisted of folks from the local Somerset area, and it consisted of architectural and design professionals. I believe there were 15 people altogether. Initially, I was what they called a recorder. So my job was to take notes. There were 2 people from a company that were running this whole design, this whole discussion for over these 3 days, and my job was to take notes to help them make sure nothing was missed. So I was part of all the discussions, but at that time I was not a full voting member of the jury. What occurred was that one of the architectural professionals was not able to attend that first day. As it went into the second day, she also was unable to attend. So by the end of the second day, I think it was decided by all parties concerned that it really didn't make sense for her to be a part of something that had already been, 2 of the 3 days had gone by. So at that point, I was promoted, as it were, to a full voting jury member. It was a very emotional 3 days. We had all kinds of discussions about the designs. People who could, when they had all the designs up in the finalists, people could leave notes. They could leave comments. We were given access to those. We discussed a lot of those. We had some really serious conversations about all that. And I think it was what came out of one of those conversations for me, and what makes the Flight 93 Memorial so important and so special is that, we learned obviously that the people who embrace a terrorist philosophy are willing to die for their cause. They had done it then, they have done it since then, tragically many, many more times, but their cause was obviously death. The people on Flight 93, I'm convinced they did not want to die, but they had a little bit of information and a little bit of knowledge, certainly more knowledge and more information and more time than the people on the other planes had, certainly more information than the people at the Pentagon or the towers. So they had something that none of those other folks had, a little time and some knowledge, and they acted on it. And, their cause was life. So, that's the difference. That's what makes this memorial so important.
So the slide that you see now, I'm not sure, if everybody has had the opportunity to go out there or not, but that is the wall of names. So they're all listed there. And then at the end where the two people are standing and looking through is to the crash. And there's a boulder out there that, kind of designates the actual impact site. So it's a very beautiful memorial. It's the land around is beautiful. It's peaceful. I find it, I'm sad whenever I'm there, but I also find it cathartic in a way, and just it's peaceful and calming, and a place to embrace your feelings, your sadness, without getting lost in them, if that makes sense. So I did not go out until February. It took me a while, honestly, until I felt that I was ready to get out there. I was still traveling a lot, and it just took me a while. And I didn't actually join the family board until probably a few years ago. I was a treasurer and was involved with that board, and just fundraising for everything. We actually ran the New York City Marathon twice to raise funds, and I had never run a marathon before, which is probably the only reason I actually did it the first time, because I had no idea what I was getting into. But the family members that were on the board and that ran, we got so close to, and still are very close to. And I had said at the end of that marathon, I'm never doing that again. That's silly. But then when the family members came back and said, hey, let's do it again for the, because it was the 15th anniversary, I said, okay, great, let's do it. And because that was just kind of the relationship that we had all developed. So it's been very humbling to watch the process of the, what my dad and the others went through with all of the selection, and then to the actual construction and that temporary memorial. And it's really just a powerful place to go. The visitor center is very well done. There are parts in the visitor center that took me a while to actually be able to really sort of dive into. There's some recorded phone calls and things like that. I probably was my third or fourth time there until I could pick up the phone and listen to those. But some of what they found, seeing it there, the one credit card that they found that was helped them to follow the money, the bad guy get the money. Some of the things that survived were truly amazing too. So my aunt's, what do you call that, Dad? I'm blanking.
Logbook.
Her logbook, thank you. So her logbook, they were able, that survived, that they had to keep, the date and kind of all the happenings and things, as well as her bottle opener and everything, which is actually in New York City. So, it's just getting to know the families and just being able to go out there and see this and see all these people that come and see how it impacts all the people who come, who, maybe didn't have a personal tie to anybody that day, but everybody has a personal tie in a way to that day. Like you said, Brooke, we all remember exactly what we were doing that day. It's one of those events in history. So.
Yeah.
One of the things that always struck me during the temporary memorial time, as it were, is the things that people would leave there. And I was there at all times of the day, at all times of the year. I remember being there once. I was out for a meeting in February, and it was colder than cold. It can get very windy. Anybody who's been to Somerset knows that it can get windy there, especially at the site sometimes. And I was there in February. It was snowing. It was colder than cold. And there were people there. There was some folks I was chatting with from North Carolina that had stopped. And I remember seeing things that Many things that you would find there that people would leave made a lot of sense. You would find first responder badges, a fireman, an ambulance, a police badge or something. Some of those things made perfect sense. Other things that you would find there seem to have no connection, but I've actually seen people there almost kind of patting their pockets, looking for something that they could leave, something of themselves. There were things that were left there, like a combat infantryman's badge, Purple Hearts, things that are earned the hard way and not given up lightly. So, Memorial has been a special place for a lot of people.
And I saw that too with the children. So, you would see things like teddy bears or little things, and even children seemed to feel that way of wanting to leave something and to be a part of it.
So that kind of rolls into really speaking to the next generation. And I know we talk about how important it is to share the story of Flight 93, to remember and make connections to the individual passengers and crew members, and really teaching the next generation about September 11 as an historic event, a 21st century event that continues to impact their young lives, even though we're now nearly 19 years later. So I guess, Emily, this question's for you. How has raising your kids in a post 9/11 world impacted how you explain the story of Flight 93, September 11 as a whole?
So my children are 12 and 10 now. They're going into 7th and 5th grade respectively. And certainly they, more so than an average kid that age, know a lot about that day and certainly Flight 93. My daughter's name is Lorraine. So she has always had that connection and understood. We've always let her know where that name came from. As they got older, I would share with them the historical facts of the day, what happened, just kind of all of the details, not just sort of more the facts, the timing. As my dad had mentioned, that the people on Flight 93, the flight was delayed, so they had time and they had conversations and talking about that. And I've always really tried to, as Mr. Rogers said, to look to the good people and show them that yes, bad things happen, but look at how much good and how many good people there were that tried to protect others and tried to help others. So we have done presentations. My kids have done them with me a lot. My son can draw the path of the flight, and they know the times and they know all those details. And every time I'm out there, now with the visitor center, I'm just struck at how important it is for people to understand history and to be educated about it, and for kids to have a place to go to really see that history. It just makes so much more sense when they can see, the pictures there, when they see the things that were found in the field. I don't think they've listened to the recordings yet, and that's okay. Obviously, the different ages, different comfort levels with things, but they have been involved with the anniversary. My son has said her name during the what's the word I'm looking for?
The reading of the names.
Yes, the reading of the names. When we're all there, the observances. Thank you. There it is. And so I'm on a school board, on our local school board, on a public education advocacy group. I'm in the PTO. I just am really passionate about education and public education. And I just think that having this place there and understanding that not every child out there has the information that my children have, because I have the information that I have. So knowing that this is here, and then the work that the Friends are doing and that the Park Service is doing is so important. Doing these kinds of presentations, there's been so much outreach with schools and trying to help, presentations for the schools, which has been really powerful and really important. And that there's this place that they can go, that they can learn about the tragedy of that day, but yet walk away with the power of love and what the choices that the passengers and crew of Flight 93 made. Makes sense.
Yeah, especially, you know, we found through our education outreach efforts, I mean, there's no standard curriculum in schools across PA or the nation about how you teach, you know, September 11th. And normally current events is more towards high school age. So it's really interesting to see once kids have an opportunity to either come to the memorial or, you know, get some kind of in-classroom education, that they really understand the event, and, you know, they can make a connection to the overall story of what happened, but also the people on the plane once you actually explain it to them. So it's you don't have to shy away from it. I feel like kids are actually more able to pick up the story nowadays than you would expect them to.
Right. Oh, and one thing to mention, if anybody watching does have kids and is able to come out and visit, there's a really cool program that you will find at other national parks, but it's the Junior Ranger program. And if you remember that picture of my daughter, she had her hand up, she had actually done the Junior Ranger program and was getting her honorary Ranger badge. And it's really neat. You get this booklet and there's like word searches and things, and it's very age appropriate. And it's something that they can take with them and share. And when we've done presentations at our elementary school, that's kind of what we focus on. We use that so that, you know, it's not scary or anything. It's just same as if we were talking about any other event in history, really.
Yeah. So, Emily, I know you serve on the Friends Board currently and on the Families Board. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience?
So the Friends, I'm very honored to be able to serve on the board. And as we had mentioned and Brooke had mentioned in the beginning, you know, there's so many programs that the Friends are doing to educate and outreach and support the memorial. You know, as my dad had mentioned, this is in a beautiful part of the world, but it's in a very temperature extreme part of the world. It gets very hot, it gets very cold, there's ice, so there's a lot of upkeep that needs to happen. And the Friends is very supportive of that and making sure that, you know, the memorials is supported. They are doing a pollinator series, which is really fascinating. And to me, the whole landscape is truly a part of the memorial. And it's also sometimes if you're out there and it feels a little overwhelming and you look out and you can see the hives and the bees and sort of nature repairing itself, it's very powerful. So I would definitely, you know, if you have a moment, check out the website and check out some of the speaker series that are coming up and that they've done in the past. And, you know, hopefully we can at some point get back to doing these on site, but there's a lot of really wonderful resources that they provide.
Ed, is there anything else you'd like to add?
As a family member, or all family members, of course, this is something that is always with us. I have two granddaughters, Lorraine, that we've talked about. My son and his family live on the West Coast, and I have a granddaughter who lives out there, and her name is Abigail, and her middle name is Grace, and Lorraine's middle name was Grace. So we have two granddaughters that both have her name. And with all family members, I don't think a day goes past where we don't think about the person. It might be a phrase, it might be a piece of clothes, it might be an event. And talking about the education aspect of it, Lorraine's birthday was July 20th, and I always go out to the memorial on her birthday with her husband, Eric, and we were just there a few days ago with my wife. And the thing that struck me more and more every time I go out is that when one looks around, you see more and more people who were not of an adult age on September 11th. So the history, the educational aspect of it becomes more and more important on a daily basis. When we were there earlier this week, I would think without exaggeration, 40%, 50% of the people I saw there were younger folks. So it's really important. The Park Service has done a a wonderful job. We've gotten to know many of the Park Service people over the years, and they've all been capable and caring and passionate about this memorial. One thing I mentioned earlier about when the memorial was created, only a year afterward in September of 2002, and that memorial was created unanimously in Congress. And we have been blessed over the years, both sides of the aisle. There has never been anything political about the Flight 93 memorial. We've always had the support of all of the people. President Bush has been there, President Clinton, President Obama, Vice President Biden, and it's so easy these days to somehow get tied up in politics. But Flight 93 is something that reaches out to all of us, and it's something that has embraced all of us, regardless of who we are and where we're from. The many family members that we talked about that over the years that we've really gotten to know very well. They become our friends. When we go out there, we know the stories of other family members. It's really great. Sometimes it makes it a little bit harder because you have your own heartache, and as you get to know some of the other folks, you share in their heartache also. The community members out there have been absolutely marvelous over the years. Many family members have really gotten to be good friends with community folks out there. Community at large has been very accepting and has embraced the memorial. The ambassadors are volunteers. The story of the memorial could not be told as well as it is told without those ambassadors. You can't have park rangers everywhere. These volunteers come out in the dead of winter, in the heat of summer, and they're there to talk to people, and many visitors leave with a much better understanding because of those ambassadors. And the Friends, Brooke, folks like you, the Friends have done a marvelous job telling the story. I would encourage anyone who is listening to this to learn more about the Friends and hopefully become a member of the Friends, to be part of that organization. So this, as I said in the beginning, the family members sometimes, we're a focus of things, but there's, many more people that have been involved in creating this and developing and making this memorial what it is today. So we're all a big part of that. So thank you to all.
Yeah.
Well, I think a big takeaway is that we're just very lucky to still have first-person accounts of these important histories that can be told straight from family members like you and from various other people directly tied to Flight 93 and September 11th. So like Ed said, we want to ensure that these programs just continue to remain relevant and accessible, and you can become a member and donate to support our education outreach efforts at the URL on your screen, flight93friends.org. So we have just a couple of questions from our audience members that we can go to. So I know one is to Ed and Emily both. Just, do you have a feature that you like best about the memorial, or I guess an experience? Is it walking the trails? Is it the visitor center? Is it down at the wall?
Mm-hmm. I'll try to get something out of my mouth here. I like being up at the visitor center, and there's an overlook and looking, and then walking down the trail to the wall, or starting at the wall and coming up, but having that time to reflect in between and seeing the viewpoint. Once you're in the visitor center, it's very powerful. It's a lot to take in. So coming out and just having that space, and being able to go down and see her name and all the other names. It's really, I think that's probably just the way it's all oriented along the flight path and everything. I think that's, I like that, I guess.
One of the things that strikes me in such a way is that if anyone has the time and you walk from the visitor center down through the grove of trees, you can walk all the way around that long walkway and come down to the parking lot where the contact station is, and walk along the land there to the wall. But when one does that, if you look around while you're walking, the terrain changes constantly. And you're walking along and you look over and you see the visitor center, you can see the wall, you can see the contact station, and then the terrain changes a little bit. Maybe there's a little bit of a dip and you look, and all of a sudden you can't see the visitor center, or you can't see the contact station anymore. You can't see the wall. And it's kind of a reflection on the way that life is, in a way. So it always pays to kind of keep your eyes open and take it all in, and not just focus on any one particular thing. And I've done that a number of times now, and I always, it's a very peaceful walk. As Em said, you give a chance to reflect on whatever you want to reflect about. You know, all the aspects of the memorial are very well done, and it all depends on how much time you have and what you all want to take in. The visitor center, as Em said, is, I really believe, marvelously well done. I have been in some of the meetings and some of the committees, and every word that is in that thing has been talked about and vetted and gone through and discussed ad infinitum. So, you know, great care was taken in telling the story.
Yeah. So there's a question about a significant experience that's stood out in your minds, and I think what the question is trying to say is this could be anything from back way when it was just temporary memorials, or maybe it's serving on the Families or Friends Board. But is there an experience, I guess, that stands out in your minds as really rewarding now, you know, today, that you can see as helping accomplish, you know, we have the full permanent memorial. Is there anything that stands out that you were able to be a part of?
I think for me, and I'm not sure I'm answering this exactly what you're asking, but having been at a number of the observances now and seeing the impact that it has on visitors from all over the country and all over the world, that's always been very, very powerful to me. And seeing how, you know, in the beginning, it was different to when we actually had the visitor center and were able to do it. And I remember one time, I don't remember what anniversary it was. It might have been like the 10th or about there. Maybe even, actually, it was the one where my daughter met Michelle Obama and Laura Bush, and they pushed my dad out of the way to hold her because she was only like a year old at the time. She was super cute. In a
loving, caring way.
Right. So that was about 9 years ago. And a police officer from New York came up and was talking to me, and he was very emotional, and he just was like so overwhelmed, and kind of like, you know, my dad had mentioned that sometimes we seem to take these accolades, but just because they can't give that to the heroes of Flight 93. And it just left such an impression on me that he was so happy to have somewhere to come and pay his respects and be able to be there. So that was every time I'm there and I see the reactions of people, I think is probably as a whole kind of the most powerful thing to me, you know. That makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the things that, kind of a similar story almost, that really struck, Emily mentioned earlier about Lorraine's logbook that was found might have been 2011, I think it was. I was standing there, I guess, before the ceremony started, and I actually just started talking with a state policeman, and I had a pin on with Lorraine's picture on it, and all of a sudden he looked, and it turned out he was the officer that found the logbook.
Oh, wow.
So that was a moment.
Yeah.
That is a moment. That's a crazy coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was, Emily, how old were you again in 2001? The question is that you had incredible presence to not tell your parents in the middle of the airport and instead wait till they got to the hotel room.
Thank you. How old was I? That would require math. 25, right?
Yeah, you were almost 26.
Right. Yes. So I was like 25, 26. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So almost, I was 25. It would be 26 in a month. Yep. Sorry. I was told there would be no math. And I appreciate the sentiment. And I had a little bit of time, to kind of pull myself together. But yeah, I just knew that I couldn't do that. And I'd known that they didn't have the full story yet, and wanted him to kind of have a few moments of just knowing that, my brother was fine and safe, and I was safe, and everything at least at that point was okay. So.
Well, Ed and Emily, I want to thank you both so much for sharing Lorraine's story with our audience. And I want to thank everybody for attending today's virtual speaker series. We do have the 19th observance of September 11, 2001 coming up this September. So we encourage you to honor and remember the 40 from wherever you are. And lastly, we'll be holding another virtual speaker series program on August 20th. And we hope that you will join us again. We did just have we had one question come through again. Well, I'll read this last question for you guys. It basically says, how often do you visit the memorial? They live in Johnstown and are a radio operator. And on that day, they helped run emergency radio communications for the American Red Cross in Johnstown. And they've been to the memorial multiple times, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Probably, I would say at least 2 to 3 times a year. Generally come out for the observance if we can. As my dad mentioned, he comes out every July 20th. And we're usually out for some sort of board meeting I don't know why or how this happens. Do we ever decide? I don't know, but in February or January timeframe. So, I would say 2, 3, 4 times a year. We're on the eastern part of the state, so it's not a bad drive. It's about a 3.5-hour drive. So it's, nice in that we can get out there in a relative consistent basis. So.
Yeah, I would say I get out there probably usually Christmas time. So I'm usually there 3 times at least. And there are other times there's meetings. Last year in November, there was a dedication of the new trail that was put up to the what was the temporary memorial. So we'll come out for that kind of thing or some meetings. So I would say, over the years, at least 3, 4 times, sometimes as many as 6 or 7 times, but normally 3 or 4 times a year.
Okay, well, that's going to wrap up our program. Thank you both again for presenting, and we hope to see everybody next month on August 20th.
And thank you everybody for joining. I don't know if I mentioned that. So thank you for your time. Your caring. Thank you. Thanks, Brooke.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you, Brooke.